When I heard about this order from the CDC, well, at first, I couldn't believe it. Oh, no, not that the federal government wouldn't issue such an order, but that it would come from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. So I found the notice in the Federal Register, the list of federal laws, regulations, orders, and such, and I read it for myself. So we'll discuss that next on the Constitution Study.
One thing you have to know wherever you make your stand came from a long through line of everyday Americans.
Hello there, everyday Americans. Paul Engel here with the Constitution Study, where we read and study the Constitution and we teach the rising generation to be free. I am glad you could join me. Thank you for spending the time. You know, we're having a lot of fun. I've been making a couple changes here to the Constitution Study, doing a couple more live streams, doing some more webinars, trying to really engage. And I really appreciate it when people both I watch the analytics, right? I know when you're watching the video. Well, I don't know when you're watching the videos, but I know when people are watching my videos and reading my content, and it's always good to see those numbers going up. So I thank you. I thank you for participating. I hope you'll consider this little piece of your time worth it, that you'll share it, and that we can all enjoy and learn a little bit more about our Constitution and what our representatives in government, the people we hire to represent us, are actually doing. So let's talk about this little order from the CDC. While many states and cities have used COVID-19 as an excuse to infringe on the rights of their citizens, the federal government has been somewhat more restrained. Focusing primarily on recommendations rather than orders, those in the executive branch of the federal government seem to be trying to keep within their enumerated powers, or at least a little bit. Well, you see, that is until the CDC published their order on September 4th. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, located within the Department of Health and Human Services, announces the issuance of an order under Section 361 of the Public Health Service Act to temporarily halt residential evictions to prevent the further spread of COVID-19. If you've followed my work for any length of time, you probably guessed what I did next. I searched for Section 361 of the Public Health Service Act. I found it was in 42 U.S.C. Section 264, Regulation to Control Communicable Diseases. Now, this part of the United States Code deals with the authority of the Surgeon General and the Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services to create and enforce regulations that are necessary to prevent the introduction or spread of communicable diseases from foreign countries or between the states. Now, that little piece of information is very important, since nothing in the Constitution grants Congress the power to write laws regarding public health. Although Congress does have the authority to regulate commerce with foreign nations and among the states. That's Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3. But public health is not commerce. Although I might consider an argument that stopping the transmission of a serious disease from entering the Union or traveling between the states could be considered part of the general welfare of the United States. Now, that is not the purpose of this video, so with that in mind, let's look at the details of this notice and the law it claims gives them the authority to promulgate it. Let's take a look at Section 361 of the Public Health Service Act, as it was put into law under 42 U.S.C. Section 264. Quote, "The Surgeon General, with the approval of the Secretary, is authorized to make and enforce such regulations as in his judgment are necessary to prevent the introduction, transmission, or spread of communicable diseases from foreign countries into the states or possessions, or from one state or possession into any other state or possession." Notice that the law the CDC claims gives them the authority to issue this order does not actually give the CDC any authority at all. 42 U.S.C. 264 grants the Surgeon General, with the approval of the Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services, to make and enforce regulations. What's more, those regulations are only to prevent the introduction, transmission, or spread of communicable diseases from foreign countries or from one state to another. So unless the Surgeon General and the Secretary can make a case that when someone is evicted for not paying their rent, they somehow traveled to another state, see, they have no authority to issue such a regulation. Again, from 42 U.S.C. 264. For purposes of carrying out and enforcing such regulation, the Surgeon General may provide for inspection, fumigation, disinfection, sanitation, pest extermination, destruction of animals or articles found to be so infected or contaminated as to be the source of dangerous infections to human beings, and other measures as in his judgment may be necessary. Now, this is another example of Congress making bad law. We see what the Surgeon General is allowed to do. Mostly it involves dealing with infected or contaminated items and pets or other animals. But then Congress drops this bomb, and other measures as in his judgment may be necessary. What both Congress and the CDC seem to have missed, though, is that federal law does not overrule the Constitution. You see, Article 6, Clause 2 reads, "This Constitution and the laws of the United States which shall be made in pursuance thereof, and all treaties made or which shall be made under the authority of the United States, shall be the supreme law of the land, and the judges in every state shall be bound thereby, anything in the Constitution or laws of any state to the contrary notwithstanding." Why is this important? Because the government does not have the authority to deprive you of your property without due process of law, or to take your property for public use without just compensation. From the Fifth Amendment, no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. So what happens when a renter who has not met their obligations under a contract, in this case the lease, what happens when they cannot be evicted? See, not only is the government depriving the landlord of their property without due process, but since they cannot rent the space currently held by this tenant, the government is depriving them of the liberty to engage in commerce as well. And since the CDC claims they are doing this for the public good, you have the federal government taking private property for public use without any compensation. Now, if you replace tenant with a soldier, you have one of the justifications our founding fathers used to declare themselves independent from a tyrannical government, from the Declaration of Independence, for quartering large bodies of armed troops among us. You see, the British were quartering soldiers on private property without the owner's consent, which is why we have a Third Amendment to the Constitution of the United States. No soldier shall, in time of peace, be quartered in any house without the consent of the owner, nor, in time of war, but in a manner to be prescribed by law. Is the effect really any different if the government says you must quarter another person on your property without your consent? The CDC has absolutely no authority to issue this order, and the Department of Health and Human Services has no authority to interfere with the public health issues within a state, to deprive people of their liberty and property without due process of law, or to effectively take over someone else's property for public use without just compensation. The justification listed in this notice is nothing but a lie. From that notice, there is currently a pandemic of respiratory disease, COVID-19, caused by a novel coronavirus, SARS-CoV-2, that has now spread globally, including cases reported in all 50 states within the United States, plus the District of Columbia and U.S. territories, excepting American Samoa. As of August 24, 2020, there were over 23 million cases of COVID-19 globally, resulting in over 800,000 deaths. Over 5.5 million cases have been identified in the United States, with new cases being reported daily, and over 174,000 deaths due to the disease. Now, I say defining SARS-CoV-2 as a pandemic is kind of iffy. See, Merriam-Webster defines pandemic as an outbreak of disease that occurs over a wide geographic area, such as multiple countries or continents, and typically affects a significant portion of the population. A pandemic outbreak of a disease. Yes, this disease covers a wide geographic area, but the CDC's own reports show that it is not affecting a significant portion of the population. From the CDC's update of September 12th, I found nationally the percentage of respiratory specimens testing positive for SARS-CoV-2 decreased from 5.2% during week 36 to 4.8% during week 37. I don't think 5% of the population is a significant portion. Furthermore, the CDC's own report shows that only 6% of COVID deaths are related solely to the disease. On average, there were an additional 2.6 causes of death, meaning 2 or 3 other serious injuries or diseases also led to the death of the individual. That means of the 179,927 COVID deaths that the CDC reported by September 12th, roughly 0.05% of the population, only 10,795 or 3/1,000ths of that population were due solely to the virus. Now, while any death is tragic to family and friends, I think including people who are already seriously ill and probably approaching death in an attempt to scare people into handing over their rights is despicable. Even with the padded numbers, I don't think 0.05% of the population, that's 5 out of every 10,000 people, rises to the level of significant proportion of the population either. Yet the CDC order goes on. The virus that causes COVID-19 spreads very easily and sustainably between people who are in close contact with one another, within about 6 feet, mainly through respiratory droplets produced when an infected person coughs, sneezes, or talks. The notice goes on to claim that the virus that causes COVID-19 spreads easily, but that doesn't show up in the CDC's own data. If the virus spreads as easily as they claim, why are only 5% of the tests showing positive results? The notice also claims that COVID-19 presents a historic threat to public health. According to one recent study, the mortality associated with COVID-19 during the early phase of the outbreak in New York City was comparable to the peak mortality observed during the 1918 H1N1 influenza pandemic. Pretty scary, huh? However, when I looked at the footnote listed, guess what I found? The report's called Comparison of Estimated Excess Deaths in New York City During the COVID-19 and 1918 Influenza Pandemics. This is from the Journal of the American Medical Association. Yeah, that's right. The CDC claims that COVID-19 is an historic threat because they estimated a death rate higher than the 1918 influenza. In other words, at best, it was an educated guess. And seeing just how badly these experts missed the mark, I would say their guess wasn't very educated at all. Now back to the CDC order. In the context of a pandemic, eviction moratoria like quarantine, isolation, and social distancing can be an effective public health measure to prevent spread of communicable disease. Eviction moratoria facilitate self-isolation by people who become ill or who are at risk for severe illness from COVID-19 due to an underlying medical condition. So if we are really in an actual pandemic, which the facts really don't seem to agree, the CDC says that eviction moratoria can be an effective public health measure. Then notice the sleight of hand. See, first the pretext is that COVID is everywhere. Then they say that preventing evictions can help stop the spread of a communicable disease. This is the equivalent of a magician getting you to focus on the one hand while they perform the trick in the other. Oh, what is the trick? Quote, under this order, a landlord, owner of a residential property, or other person with a legal right to pursue eviction or possessory action shall not evict any covered person from any residential property in any jurisdiction to which this order applies during the effective period of the order. So the order is to protect a covered person from eviction. Well, that could make sense, at least in certain situations. But the first question we have to ask is, what is a covered person? From the order. Covered person means any tenant, lessee, or resident of a residential property who provides their landlord, the owner of the residential property, or other person with a legal right to pursue eviction or possessory action, a declaration under penalty of perjury indicating that 1. The person has used best efforts to obtain all available government assistance for rent or housing. 2, the individual either expects to earn no more than $99,000 in annual income for calendar year 2020 or no more than $198,000 if filing a joint tax return, was not required to report an income in 2019 to the U.S. Internal Revenue Service, or received an economic impact payment, a stimulus check, pursuant to Section 2201 of the CARES Act. The individual is unable to pay the full rent or make a full housing payment due to a substantial loss of household income, loss of compensatable hours of work or wages, a layoff, or extraordinary out-of-pocket medical expenses. The person is using best effort to make timely partial payments that are as close to the full payment as the individual's circumstances may permit, taking into account other non-discretionary expenses, and eviction would likely render the individual homeless or force the individual to move into and live in close quarters in a new congregate or shared living setting because the individual has no other available housing options. You know you don't see in that list of criteria for someone to be covered under this moratoria? Any indication that the person might have COVID-19, been exposed to COVID-19, be a carrier of COVID-19. Do you see the sleight of hand? See, this illegal order from the CDC has nothing to do with slowing the spread of COVID-19. Its purpose is to bribe the people who have had their livelihood, their freedom to pursue commerce, and their very right to live at liberty without undue government interference taken away from them. See, as compensation for the state and local governments ruining your lives, the federal government will steal the very property you live on from its rightful owner, the landlord, thereby ruining their lives as well. Nice little sleight of hand, huh? See, while this order is being couched in the language of compassion for those poor people who are out of work and cannot pay their rent, this order is nothing more than an illegal, immoral theft of the American people. Those states and cities that have effectively placed their citizens under house arrest, they should be the ones paying for their illegal deeds, not the rest of the country. Furthermore, claiming authority that someone does not have is fraud. From Webster's 1828 dictionary, fraud is deceit, deception, trick, artifice by which the right or interest of another is injured, a stratagem intended to obtain some undue advantage, an attempt to gain or the obtaining of an advantage over another by imposition or immoral means, particularly deception in contracts or bargain and sale, either by stating falsehoods or suppressing truth. Depriving someone of a right protected under the Constitution and the laws of the United States, under the color of law, by the way, is a federal crime. 18 U.S.C. 242 reads, "Whoever, under color of any law, statute, ordinance, regulation, or custom, willfully subjects any person in any state, territory, commonwealth, possession, or district to the deprivation of any rights, privileges, or immunities secured or protected by the Constitution or laws of the United States, shall be fined under this title or imprisoned not more than 1 year or both." I suggest that each and every person who enjoys and values their rights contact Nina Witkowski, Acting Chief of Staff for the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and demand that this order be rescinded immediately. You can find her contact information on the CDC website. I've also put it in the article that this video is related to. You can find that on the Constitution Study website. I would also recommend that every landlord that values their property contact their local FBI office and press charges against Ms. Witkowski under 18 U.S.C. Section 242. Remind them that even the Supreme Court recognizes that any law repugnant to the Constitution is void. From Marbury versus Madison, certainly all those who have framed written constitutions contemplate them as forming the fundamental and paramount law of the nation, and consequently, the theory of every such government must be that an act of legislation repugnant to the Constitution is void. Thus, the particular phraseology of the Constitution of the United States confirms and strengthens a principle, supposed to be essential to all written constitutions, that a law repugnant to the Constitution is void, and that courts, as well as other departments, are bound by that instrument. See, if we don't want our property stolen by government, then we need to make sure that those who are trying to steal it are held accountable. If they will not comply with the law, then they need to be punished. We, the people, need to uphold the laws and the limitations we have put on our governments. Otherwise, we no longer live in a republic or a land of laws and representation. We live under a dictatorship, where the aristocracy, the ruling class in Washington, can do whatever they want and tell the American people to go eat cake. Were you as shocked by the CDC order as I was? Had you heard about the CDC order? Did you look at it as, oh, good, we're protecting those poor people who have lost their jobs? Or did you see it as a federal power grab, as a government theft of property, as a violation of the most basic rule of law and rights of the American people? Now, if you said the former, maybe you could use a little bit more education. By all means, check out the website, Constitution Study, for more. Check my references, check my links, find the article, find the links. I'm not asking you to trust what I say. I put in the links to all the quotes for a reason, so you can check it out for yourself. Now, if you thought the latter, if you recognize this immediately as an illegal power grab, well, congratulations. You're becoming a much better educated American. You are more quickly recognizing when your rights are being violated. But as John Jay said, that's not enough. We have to learn how to defend and assert them. That's the next step. That means why we need to call for Ms. Witkowski to pull this order immediately. And if she won't, she needs to be fired, possibly arrested. What good are laws if no one's going to enforce them? Just ask Portland and Seattle and all these other cities that are burning because people aren't enforcing the laws. No, it's up to we the people to recognize what laws are laws and what laws are void, and make sure that we are getting the laws enforced that need to be enforced, and that the laws that are void are being ignored. And that comes from education, that comes from understanding. So if you found this useful, if you learned something today, well, do me a couple favors. One, share this with others. I don't post on Facebook, YouTube, wherever. Send it to your friends and family. Get the word out. Get people to start thinking about, gee, maybe everything that Washington says isn't gold. If you like the work that I'm doing here and you want to make sure the Constitution Study podcast keeps going out, well, then consider donating on the website. Just go to constitutionstudy.com, click the donate button, or go to /donate and provide some money. All that helps. It costs me to host this and to keep this going. And every dollar that you donate on the website goes directly to keeping the Constitution Study podcast up and running and getting you this great information. And if you want to help in other ways, well, you could always go to the store and pick something else. Buy a book, buy a class. Join the membership. The Constitution Scholars is a really interesting place. We're still kind of getting our feet under us, but the idea is that this is where we can get together. Those who want to go deeper and get into deeper discussions, more long-term discussions, that's where you can go for the Constitution Scholar. It's $5 a month. It's $50 a year, and you get unlimited access to all of my digital material, as well as better access to me and to certain scholar-only events. Those are a great opportunity if you're interested. But remember that everything on the website is absolutely free. It's free to use. It's free to share, because I'm not here to get rich. I'm not even making any money off of this. But I want to share it with everyone else, and I hope you find value in it. If you do, please share. If you can help, please do. If you'd like me to speak at one of your events or do a webinar for you, please contact me through the website. Those are all ways that I can help you read and study the Constitution, how to learn and to teach others to be free. And if that was worth your time, I'll meet you here next time on the Constitution Study.
There's one thing you have to know wherever you make your stand.